So to set up this exploration of mise-en-scene, I'd like to remind us what the approach, the focus of the course is. We're looking at cinema as an art form, and therefore really approaching it from the perspective of formal analysis. So looking at the formative elements that make up this art form, motion pictures. And we've started already by exploring what distinguishes film as an art form, those fundamentals, the types of movies. We've actually broken down one system of approach, which is the elements of narrative. And then now we're going to look at mise-en-scène, which is, I guess that's my question to you. Think about it. I think you should have explored the reading at this point. If not, then the question is, well, what does this word mean? What is mise-en-scène? We use it a lot. We will be using it a lot, and I want you to actually actively explore it in this particular unit. If we translate it succinctly from its French, it means staging the scene. It's a theater term in France, or in French. And so literally means staging the scene. So the influence comes from the stage, but now we're looking at it from the perspective of cinematic art. And so mise-en-scène actually refers to the overall look and feel of a movie. It's visually what's actually presented to us within the frame. Mise-en-scène is the sum of everything the audience sees and hears, and this is now based on the definition presented in your textbook. Sees and hears the sound and experiences while viewing it, although I need to stress this. I'm not going to trick you in terms of any type of quiz questions in this regard, but I'm pretty strict in terms of the analysis of mise-en-scène as looking at visually what's actually represented within the frame. We actually will take sound and dialogue and essentially put that aside. We can get clues from the sounds, but primarily we're looking at the visual representation, what's actually contained within the frame, and what does that reveal about characters, about the narrative, about the theme. Mise-en-scène, the combination of elements within the frame, provides the overall meaning to the shot or scene, and it influences our mood as we watch it. I'm going to take a moment and look at this frame from The Silence of the Lambs, and what does it convey in terms of the positioning of the figures within the frame, the representation of space, what's actually presented on screen versus what's left off screen, the use of color, the use of size of the figures, the use of the gaze, which is the way the characters are actually looking at one another, and all that can then convey to you, the audience member, relationships, power, theme, perhaps even what a character is thinking or what a character is feeling. There are two major visual components of mise-en-scène. There's first the design, which is the process by which the look of the settings, the props, the lighting, costumes, and the actors is determined. So we're looking at overall, what is the design? How is that world going to look in all of its elements, all of its visual elements? Physically, okay, the physical world itself. The composition, the second part of mise-en-scène, is the composition of the organization, distribution, balance, and general relationship of actors and objects within the space of each shot, so what's actually composed within the frame. So we can look at mise-en-scène from another perspective, and that is incorporating stagecraft. We can take it from the use of space and the use of dimension. So the design is actually looking at the three-dimensional space and how is it looking. And then the other aspect, which is composition, which we're composing for the two-dimensional frame. Yes, there is the term which is mise-en-shot, the staging of the shot. It's really more about, be familiar with the term. I'm not going to test you on it, but we do. It's actually an element within the larger context of mise-en-scène. But we're going to be looking at it from that larger context, what's actually designed, and then how is that design or those elements and the figures actually composed within the frame. So the staging or the mise-en-scène of the elements placed in front of the camera and the way they're photographed. This is one of the reasons why I like to look at mise-en-scène strictly from the visual, and that is we go back to the roots of cinema art, and that's as a silent form of art. And in this frame from the Lumiere's short, Their Actuality, Baby's Breakfast, is all the elements that are here within the mise-en-scène. We've got the baby, so these figures that are placed here, the mother, the father, what the baby holds, the biscuit, all the other elements that are in here in terms of the tea set, the bottles, these are all part of that, and these are essentially could be designed. The backdrop, the setting itself is also part of the mise-en-scène. The foliage, the bushes and the trees in the background, all that becomes part of the mise-en-scène, and therefore we can provide a formal analysis or an analysis of the mise-en-scène, looking at the composition, the way that they are actually placed, the way the sense of depth that is actually presented here, the use of contrast that actually can help provide this sense of depth. We can even go further in terms of the rule of thirds and looking at the composition of these characters and how they are actually used, these little sweet spots that are presented with the rule of thirds that we're exploring and learning about in this section also. So design, if we just focus on that first aspect of mise-en-scène, it comes under the jurisdiction, if you will, of the production designer, who's actually brought in early into the film production, so it's pre-production. The production designer is going to work closely with the director, but they also are working closely with the director of photography, who's the cinematographer. And the production designer is responsible for the overall design concept. They will not only are they creative, but they're also supervisors. So they're looking at, because the production designer has to oversee a lot of different elements of the design, including costumes and makeup, the use of foliage, the use of cars and other vehicles. So all those become part of that jurisdiction, in which case the designer, he or she, needs to designate that to those individual departments. So they supervise those departments, making sure everything is coordinating for the overall look of the film. And then with it, there's a sense of visual continuity, balance, dramatic emphasis, so that it is, in fact, representing the overall vision of that motion picture. Design can happen through the use of drawings. This is Guillermo del Toro. And the director himself actually presenting these to then the craftspeople, the designers, who will then create those designs and actually realize them. So they could be drawings, they could be pre-visualized, so computer generated imagery that's presented through storyboards and so on, that is then conveyed through actual design elements. If you look at this frame carefully, we actually, this area here looks like we're inside an apartment. This is from the motion picture, The Social Network. But if you look carefully, it's actually, we're actually in a sound studio. So a lot of, especially in narrative film, we see a lot of use of soundstage, in which case we've got flats that are here. The production designer will also provide the lights, so we've got artificial lights that are present here within the soundstage, which then can be used by the cinematographer to convey the emotions, the mood, the relationships of characters and so on, that's going to help convey the director's vision within the frame. But the sources of light have to be provided and by the production designer. Part of that design is going to be lighting, in which it's suggested that the production designer at least needs to be able to provide the sources of light, and then the cinematographer is able to use those sources of light to convey the vision of the director. These can be artificial lights, as seen here. They can be natural lights. So the natural lighting needs to be, is again available, and then can be manipulated. It can be redirected, but I think what's important, let me stress here, is that the source of the lighting is going to be provided, if you will, by the production designer, but the manipulation, the actual use of the lighting when we're actually shooting the film is under the control and the supervision of the cinematographer, the director of photography. For actors, I think it's very important when they of putting in all the elements of their character. They're developing that when through the dialogue, through the analysis of the characters, through the motivations of the scenes, the breakdowns of the scenes. But then there's that very powerful moment in which we actually put on the costumes and be able to put on the makeup and be able to decide what our hairstyle is going to be. That could be very significant in terms of the final realization of the characters, and so that also becomes part of the again, the jurisdiction, if you will, of the production designer. We'll have individual departments or costume and makeup and hair. So here's all of the elements here that I want you to explore. You'll have setting and decor properties, costume, makeup, and hairstyle. The lighting, which you're going to learn, is broken down based on quality, the direction, the source, and the color. Stage performance, and this is now what's important here, is that we're looking at physically how is it that the characters are communicating actions, relationships within that visual space. So we're looking at visuals. We can get clues from dialogue, but in terms of analysis, I really want you to try and focus on visually what's actually being represented and presented there. Then we have this important element, which is movement, which is kinesis, and we look at movement from two aspects. There's the movement of objects and characters, which is the blocking, the physically moving of figures from one area of the stage space to another. So we're going to have actor A going across the stage and crossing to the table, taking a seat. Actor B will go to the kitchen, pick up the glass, pour the orange juice, and walk it to. That's all blocking. That's the physical manipulation of the movement of the objects of the figures. Then the second aspect of kinesis is the movement of the frame, the actual moving camera. And I want you to, we're going to start educating our eye, if you will, developing the eye in terms of what you're seeing. So you're actually being aware of how a director may decide to focus, and the cinematographer too, deciding on the movement of the figures within the frame, and at times when it's important to be able to move the frame itself or the movement of the camera. So watch that carefully as you do your analysis. Composition, if you think of then the planning of the mise-en-scène. So we're going from now the design aspects, what we've created in a three-dimensional space. Now there's the additional element, well, how do we actually compose that within the shot? And so it's making these advanced decisions about the placement of the people, the objects, the elements of this decor, the actual visual space. Those decisions are what's communicated between the director and the cinematographer. The cinematographer is then, with his crew, going to set up the lighting. There is the figuring out of exactly where we're going to place the camera angle and deciding what that framing is going to be of the shot. This, again, is communication that's happening between the cinematographer and the director. There is the choreographing of the movement of the camera, so that if we decide, yes, we do want to have that tracking shot, we're actually moving with the action, then that movement or the choreography is also being rehearsed, practiced, and structured and determined. And then finally there is the creation of the sounds that emanate from the shot, although again from this standpoint I'd like us to really focus on the visuals. We're going to get to sound later on in the course. Composition then is the general relationship of the figures, those objects, the use of light, shadow, look at line and color within the frame. Framing is what we're going to see moving on screen, or actually the framing is actually what's contained within the screen, and then kinesis is what moves on the screen as well as the movement of the frame itself. And what we're looking at in terms of composition is how is it we want the audience's eye to take in the image and to move through that image to take the focus and best understand what's being communicated within that frame. And yes, we can produce, it can be a fairly flat image, not a lot of depth, but we also have the power now of being able to compose depth within this two-dimensional frame. And right now we're putting aside 3D, VR, those elements that are now much more advanced when looking at just basic composition of the two-dimensional motion picture shot, okay, and how that's being conveyed and communicated. So now we can go back to Silence the Lambs in that frame and just kind of keeping in mind, I let you kind of settle on this frame and consider it, but then being aware that, yeah, there's a lot that's being communicated with the woman, Clarice, and how she's centered here, not looking at any of them, looking up, the way her body posture is, the placement of her hands, the color of her shirt versus the color of the red male detectives that are here, the agents, and the gaze that's coming down from these two, the dominance of them as they're all looking over her, and all this within the contained space. There's a fairly good sense of flatness here in the image, not a lot of depth that's actually presented here.